Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host and special guest, Alex Guillot. Hey, Alex.
Oh, hey, John. How are you?
Good. You know, you've become a regular co-host guest. That's why I called you co-host, because, you know, Federico, I don't know, where he's off doing some iPad OS review stuff. So we've given him the day off. And because he's not here, I thought we would do a slightly different show with you about the Apple TV, because as we record this, the Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen was released the day before, or was announced the day before. We're recording kind of middle of the week. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit, I guess, first of all, about how we use our Apple TVs, then maybe a little bit about what we think these Apple TVs mean for consuming TV and movies and music and whatnot, and then where we'd like to see things go from here. But first, you were telling me before we got started about a very strange story about why your Apple TV movie library is choked full of one particular series. What movie series is it, and how did that happen?
This is true. So when I first moved to Minnesota, which was a little over 5 years ago, it was my first time out here, and I didn't really know very many people. And what I ended up doing was watching a lot of movies because I had a lot of free time at the start, and I was building furniture for my, like IKEA furniture, things like that. I had a lot of time in the apartment, and I decided that I was going to finally catch up on some TV series that I hadn't, so like some classic series that are long and that I generally wouldn't have time to watch all of. So that's when I watched every Marvel movie, because I'd been behind on those back then, and a bunch of other ones. And in particular, I decided that I was going to try to watch every single James Bond movie
That's a lot.
Had ever existed. Yeah, which I believe is something, I want to say 27 movies now. And so and the thing with the James Bond movies is that they're all pretty old, and especially back then, I don't know if they're anywhere now, but back then they weren't on any streaming services. Every once in a while, one or two would be, and I would check for those. But for the most part, I was just picking them up on the Apple TV. They also were pretty cheap, if I recall. And so it was like, rent this for $6 or buy it for $10 or something like that. So I was just like, I'll just start buying some of these. I've heard that they're supposed to be good movies. So I started buying these James Bond movies a little bit at a time. And then after a while, I noticed that Apple actually had one of those deals that they do in the Apple TV app where they're like, oh, hey, buy all of these movies at once for, a significantly discounted price. And so I went through and just hit that deal and spent, I think it was probably like $100 or something, and got every James Bond movie. And then when they came in, one of them was missing. And I don't remember which one it was, but I remember looking through, and it must have just happened to be the one that I was about to watch next, because I was trying to watch them in order. And this movie was not there. And so I ended up sending an email to Apple support saying, hey, I bought the thing of all of these movies, and this one didn't come in it. And so Apple support comes back to me a few days later, and they're like, oh, hey, well, we refunded your account. And so I go look in the Apple TV thinking, all right, well, they just, undid all of that. But as it turns out, they refunded all of my money for all of the movies, and actually had still given me all of the movies in my Apple TV account. So basically, Apple gave me 27 James Bond movies for free. And because I think at that time I'd only bought one or two of them. So I think I probably spent around $20 and got 27 movies out of Apple, which now my movie library in my Apple TV is just full of James Bond movies, which is, it was great. But the only annoying part is that they're not prefixed with James Bond or anything. So they're just it's sorted alphabetically, and these movies are just everywhere. And any other movie that I have in my library is interspersed with all of these James Bond movies, which is kind of funny. But I did get to watch all 27 James Bond movies, and most of them are pretty good.
Yeah, and mostly for free too, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Can't complain too much about that, can you?
No, you cannot.
All right. Well, that's cool. That's cool. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit, I guess, about what exactly was announced yesterday as we record this. And I'll just run down kind of the highlights since I wrote the article about it. You know, we've gone to a new chip architecture. It's the A15 Bionic, which is a pretty hefty chip. I mean, that's a pretty close to current generation chip compared to the A12 that used to be in the Apple TV. And Apple,
that's a generation newer even than the one they just put in the new 10th gen iPad.
Yeah, exactly, which I thought was kind of funny and kind of interesting. To me, that says that we're not going to see another Apple TV for a while, at least not in this form factor, that they want this thing to have a long shelf life. But it's got more RAM too, because the A15, I think, just as a default has 4 gigs of RAM instead of 3. There's now 128 gig storage option, which is the first time at that level, because it used to be 32 and 64. And now there's 128 option, which, okay, fine. It supports HDR10 Plus, which is very similar to Dolby Vision, as I understand it, but it's a standard that's used by Samsung TVs. So we've got more coverage there in terms of flavors of HDR. The Siri remote has a USB-C port instead of a Lightning port. Okay. The new USB-C, world is on us. I guess the downside is that there's no charger in the box. There's no cable. So I guess Apple's assuming you have one, and didn't want to put a $20 cable in there for you. And then it's also a little teeny bit smaller by like literally millimeters, and lighter, but 50% lighter.
50% lighter.
Yeah, I get. The thing is actually pretty dense. The generation before, all of them have been that way, but this one is very light, about 50% lighter.
What did they take out of it?
Who knows? I mean, I guess that's a much smaller chip. Who knows? But in any event, the pricing is the big story, though. The pricing is lower. So it starts at $129. It used to start at $179. Although I will tell you that you could get a pretty good deal on the Apple TV leading up to this announcement, where you could get, I think you could usually get the 179 one for about 150 or so on Amazon. And I guess the last difference is that higher end model, which is $149, has an Ethernet port and Thread support. It has a Thread radio in it. And it's also it's the one with the 128 gigs of memory. The other one has 64. So,
right.
Those are the specs.
This is the first time that Ethernet has been moved only to the high-end model, right?
It is.
It's kind of a shame.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame, but by the same token, I kind of suppose that most people are using this with Wi-Fi, and this is an easy way for Apple to reduce the price. Doesn't have a Thread radio, doesn't have an Ethernet port, has less storage in it. Those three things combined probably go a long way to reducing that price down. It's still not nearly as cheap as a Chromecast or a Fire TV stick or anything like that, but it's no longer pushing $200 the way it was before.
Right.
Those are all bonuses. But is there anything about any of these specs, Alex, that you think would make a meaningful difference in the way you're using the Apple TV?
No, not at all.
That's kind of my reaction too. But I have heard others who are excited about some of this stuff.
Like which parts? Like because the base model storage is now what the high end storage was, right?
Yeah, and I've actually got the base. I bought a 4K Apple TV second generation literally just 3 or 4 months ago, because I'm late to the game when it comes to 4K TVs. I only just bought one when we moved. And I don't feel bad about it at all. I've got the 32 gig version. I don't think I've ever run out of storage. I mean, if I'm running out of storage, I think the Apple TV is managing it just fine for me, offloading whatever is being offloaded. For the most part, I just stream stuff. I stream television shows and movies. I don't play a lot of video games on my Apple TV. I I have a collection of movies and TV seasons, but it's not enormous. It's in the dozens, whereas I have talked to some people whose our collections are maybe in the hundreds, where just loading that library view can be sluggish because the old Apple TV doesn't have either the chip performance or the RAM to necessarily load all the thumbnails.
That's true. I actually have seen that too when I load up my list of dozens of James Bond movies. It does take a while for a lot of the thumbnails to load.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not sure where Apple's going with the storage. I mean, I suppose it makes sense if you're playing games, because there are some Apple Arcade games that run into the gigabytes.
Do people play those though on their Apple TV?
I don't know. I mean, not a lot. Not a lot of people do. I really don't think. But
yeah, I tried when I first got mine, because I got I think I have the same model as you, but I got it when it was new, right around when the future of TV was supposedly apps, and I tried playing some of those games. I remember when they first came out. Like I got. As club members will know, I'm a big fan of Crossy Road, and they have Crossy Road on the Apple TV, and I tried playing it there, but it just the control schemes were just not good and that was on the Siri remote too. But I remember the main issue was that all the games I tried, you had to actually click the button in order to do, like in Crossy Road, like you normally on the phone you tap to go forward, and then with the Apple TV version I had to click the remote button to go forward, and it just was not, because then you're still swiping side to side when you do that way, but then you're actually physically clicking to go forward. That didn't feel good, which maybe more of those games have been thought through, but I just remember I tried quite a few originally, and I just like, none of these feel good to play with this remote. And I know you can get controllers too, but that was what I was trying at the time.
Yeah, I think that you've probably got a first generation 4K Apple TV, if that's the case, if you have that original remote, because I think the second generation came with the new one.
So the second generation was that just last year then?
It was, yeah.
Okay, you're right then. I have the first. I forgot that the remote upgrade was also a TV upgrade. I thought they just bumped the remote.
No, it was a small upgrade to the actual box too, maybe. But in any event, that it was interesting, that original remote, because I think Apple kind of fancied that as a kind of Wiimote type of situation where it's a remote that has a gyroscope in it, and it can turn into, a sword or a gun or whatever it happens to be. But it is way too small. It had way too few buttons. And I think it's good that they've gone the route of adopting the Nintendo Joy-Con and the Xbox and Sony controllers, because those companies all know how to make controllers, and those are all better controllers than your TV remote. I do think it's a little weird that Apple's never made their own controller. I think there's an opportunity there. I mean, they're really good at hardware. There's a lot of technologies like in the AirPods for pairing fast and things like that. Right. That I think Apple could take advantage of, like some of the low latency stuff they're doing there with the controller inputs to the Apple TV, but they haven't done that. It's really surprising. I mean, to me, it's like the most surprising thing next to getting out of the router business when you want to have some kind of home strategy, but you don't have the thing that controls all the home stuff. It's like, all right, this doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
But that was a long, that ship sailed a long time ago on routers. And I guess it has too on games, which here I am getting into video games and Apple again. But yeah, it's like they seem content to try to expand the mobile gaming universe, where the video game industry is going a totally different direction with handheld gaming that's desktop class with things like the Steam Deck.
Right.
And so, and what's interesting to me is that as we record this too, today, Microsoft has announced that they're creating a mobile game store. And so
I didn't see that.
They are going to come after Apple and its mobile gaming dominance from the other direction. They were barred from having having Game Pass games directly on the store except through streaming through a browser. So they're going to create their own mobile game store, which is interesting to me. I mean, that's kind of
how does that work? It wouldn't be in the App Store, would it?
No, it wouldn't. It's going to be a separate service. Presumably this will be part of a handheld that Microsoft has long rumored to be working on for Game Pass.
So it'd be alongside hardware.
I think so. I have not looked into the details of this yet. I really just saw the headline before we started, but yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. They're definitely looking to carve out a piece of the mobile gaming space that Apple's been doing so well at with the iPhone and the iPad. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But all right, so it sounds like you're mostly streaming TV and movies too, like me. Is that fair?
Oh yeah. I don't really do anything other than use the streaming services, and I'll watch movies from my library too sometimes. But I think those are, as far as I just have always assumed they're also getting streamed. I guess maybe they're sitting on the storage because I don't know what else would be sitting on the storage. But in general, that distinction hasn't really meant much to me.
Yeah, same here. Are you streaming any of the sports that Apple's doing now?
No, I haven't tried the MLS streaming yet. And then they also have the baseball games, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not a huge sports fan, so I haven't tried either of those.
Okay. Yeah, I've watched a little bit, mostly out of curiosity. I think they're pretty good. I mean, they're not that unique particularly, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I asked that in part because I want to talk a little bit about what this hardware could mean for the future. And one thing that I noticed, which was interesting to me, was that Apple's doing a better job with the sports of integrating their various services. So for instance, when I've been testing out macOS Ventura, one of the things I did was I went into Apple News because there's a new section called My Sports. And so I assigned myself some sports teams from around my area. And while I was watching Apple TV last weekend, a little pill thing pops down from the bottom telling me about the Carolina Panthers are about to start playing football. And so, there's some integration going on there, and I expect that it's going to require greater compute power to kind of overlay this on top of a live stream, the various graphics and animations and so forth. And I could really see, it obviously makes a lot of sense with something like sports where you can have all kinds of statistics and other things coming down on top of whatever you're watching. But, I could also see maybe news programs with links out to Apple News that then are saved for you to read more later on your iPhone or your iPad, or maybe concerts that will, link you back in the music app to the artist whose concert you're watching, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. So this is like the ability for kind of metadata to be inserted into an actually streaming piece of content in a way that
exactly.
It's kind of like maybe Amazon's X-Ray service, you can bring up that menu and get a bunch of details on what is actually going on the screen in front of you, which I've always found that service really useful. And that that just does things like what actors in this scene, what else have they been in, just kind of more fun content. But it's really interesting to be able to do those kinds of things. It's just a lot of work in terms of implementation, like how there's a lot of moving pieces there. You got to work with the people making the content, and somehow there's some team somewhere that is actually kind of inserting that content at the correct timestamps. So it's a very interesting problem, but I agree that kind of thing is a really powerful idea if Apple can kind of make it happen. They haven't copied X-Ray yet, so in fact, I don't feel like anyone has, which has always been surprising to me, and has kind of made me think maybe this is a harder. It sounds like a hard problem. Maybe it's an even harder problem.
Yeah, or maybe the fact of the matter is that Amazon isn't allowing IMDb to be used by other services because they own them, and so maybe they don't license them to other streaming services. I don't know. I'm sure there are other sources of data you can get for TV and movies besides IMDb, although I think that one is the one that you see used in most places most of the time. But
yeah, it's kind of the definitive one.
yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know. I think, it's the Apple TV, not super exciting. On the other hand, if you're still rocking an Apple TV HD and you have a 4K TV now might be a good, now might be a good time to upgrade. I do still have an HD Apple TV, and I'm going to keep using it and enjoying it on my crappier older TV that's in another room. So
does that still have the like very old remote?
No, not the very old one. It's got the glass one like you were talking about.
Okay,
the original, yeah, the original Siri remote. No, it doesn't have the one before that. I've actually had Apple TVs going back to the original one, which looked like a Mac Mini and was.
Oh man, I missed that original one. I had the one after that.
The original one I had until really recently, and as of just a year or two ago, I fired it up because that is a really cool intro video. Where all this video gets sucked into the Apple logo. It's really a neat little intro video. And the thing
like an on boot video.
Yeah. And
hilarious.
And it still worked really well. And a lot of people jailbroke those because they were running Mac OS, I think, a very stripped down version of Mac OS, and it didn't have a lot of storage or anything. But anyway, yeah, I've had a lot of Apple TVs, but it's a good upgrade if you're coming from the HD version. And I think if you're bumping up against those storage limits for some reason, maybe you are heavy into Apple Arcade and you've got the 32 gig model, might be another reason to upgrade to this one as well. Or I suppose if you have a new Samsung TV and HDR10 Plus is your kind of thing, because that was not available on the older models. They only had Dolby Vision. So that's if you're into the HDR10 Plus, that's another reason to do it.
Yep, makes sense.
All right, Alex, thanks for joining me today for another episode of Mac Stories Unwind. Let people know, Alex, where they can find you online.
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at _Alex Guillot, where, I'm tweeting sick memes all the time.
Oh,
now,
yeah, you are the meme master. Meme master Alex, we call him.
Or on Instagram at AJGUYOT.
All right. And you can find me too over at macstories.net, and I'm at John Voorhees on Twitter and Instagram. That's JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you later, Alex.
See you, John.